Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are in the stream. Welcome to today's episode. We're going to be having a number of interesting topics to discuss today. This is the pre-show, as always, where we get to discuss some of the issues that are hot on the web. Remember that after today's main broadcast, we will also be back here on our website discussing some of these issues in greater depth and getting into a couple of new things as well. So definitely stay tuned for the post-show. Ben, Ahmed, great to see you both today. Ahmed, what kind of stuff is going on?
Well, I don't know. You saw this internet in a suitcase story.
I did see internet in a suitcase, indeed. Yeah. That was very interesting.
So it's the U.S. government's secret project to provide liberation technology, as it's called, for dissidents in rogue states. So this is obviously coming out of what we've seen where some, as they say, authoritarian leaders are shutting down the internet, so they want to make sure that the internet would be available. They've already done some of these programs in Afghanistan, but you have an interesting kind of contrast and juxtaposition, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of it. It's about time. Mm-hmm. It's sort of strange that the American government has spent almost $2 trillion over the past 10 years nominally advancing freedom and democracy, and we've dedicated tens of millions to the most important empowerment devices. And I think it's a hugely important investment, and hopefully one that we double down.
But you said $2 trillion nominally supporting freedom and democracy. Where has that money gone?
Well, so if the U.S. government and the government here, we talk about using that money for freedom and democracy primarily through the military. It's overpowering and not empowering. Yeah. What I think is the most important investment for what we're looking for is actually providing empowering tools to allow people.
This is the thing that I find interesting. For so long, they've supported quite publicly these, just governments like Mubarak and others in the region, across the world, frankly. And now all of a sudden it seems like perhaps because of these Arab awakenings, they're starting to reinvest their money and their priorities into different ways of trying to.
Honestly, it's all about interest. It's all about interest and about leverage. So if you've got a guy that's there and he's got a secure environment where he's going to keep people under control, and it's going to be an environment that does what you feel is in your national security interest, then the interests of the actual people on the ground may take a secondary or tertiary position. But if those people have asserted themselves and have said, no, we are going to have a system that is accountable to us, then all of a sudden the government of other countries, like the United States, has an interest in making a relationship with those people.
Well, we've seen, like in Syria, like even in the recent, I think it was a week or two ago, when on Friday the internet went essentially off in Syria, at least 3/4 of the internet, we saw that satellite phones started to transmit images and videos. And so the question is, no one really knows where those satellite phones came. There's certain people who think it was certain organizations, which will remain nameless. But so now the U.S., I guess, governments are getting in the game too, not just nonprofits.
Well, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting because the U.S., as you're alluding to, Ben, has put a lot of money into promoting these freedom and democracy projects, but it's been primarily military. So when you look at the interventions in Iraq, you look at the interventions in Afghanistan, particularly Iraq was designed to be, or was billed as a democracy promotion activity. But what you're having now is the realization, or at least the acknowledgement, that democracy can't be astroturfed. You can't impose it from outside. It's by nature something that is within.
Grassroots.
So exactly. So now they're talking about the possibility of supporting people's voices. I think what's going to be interesting is to what degree that continues if the interests of the people, or what the people say they want, is not necessarily seen as being in the interest of the United States. Will we still be promoting free internet?
I think it's a big concern of the United States government, but I will say the underestimation the United States had of the people in the Arab world that rise up themselves to empower themselves and take advantage of these tools is a radical misstep, a radical misplace, and I think the government's trying to accommodate for that now and making these investments hugely important overall, but should have been done 10 years ago and earlier.
But Derek, what were you saying earlier about, would this change? What was your question earlier, just to him?
Oh, so basically, if let's say, for example, like you've got something and they're moving for freedom and democracy and the people want it. And that's something that's very clearly in line with American values. But let's say, for example, a simple one. Let's say in Yemen, people come in and they're like, we want to, and this is an abstract.
You're saying if they're using the internet not for freedom.
Well, let's say that they decide, let me not even put in a real name. Let's say in Outlandia, the people come up and they say, we want to establish an Islamic republic and we want to be closer to our brothers and sisters in Iran. Will we be promoting free internet there?
Well, that's the question, obviously, in terms of policy. But I mean, they are claiming that this came out of these plans are coming out of the fact that the UN declared that access to the internet and to information is a human right. So to kind of change that and use caveats as to what kind of information people want access to or want to be publishing or communicating, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens. But
I think the U.S. government's going to have a very difficult time putting the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, you
right?
can.
Once you stand up and fight for sort of freedom of speech, it's impossible to undermine. You're in a much worse situation, trying to advance it, getting out of the bottle, and now retracting. What they will do, though, what the government will do, is use other measures insofar as the elected governments are hostile to the United States. If they try to implement Sharia law, you're going to see certainly some reaction. I don't, though, think it's going to be the U.S. government pulling back from the possibility of freedom of speech.
Okay, so then let me put it in a more concrete context.
Yes.
Are they going to be sending internet in a suitcase to Riyadh or Jeddah or Al-Khobar?
Well, that's, I mean, you know.
Are we going to be seeing internet in a suitcase in Beijing?
I mean, these are all questions that you're presuming that the U.S. government would be transparent as to their actual. I mean, you know, they're obviously allies with Saudi Arabia. Are they going to be doing that? I'm presuming they would.
And the point that I'm making is I don't think that governments aren't. I think governments can be transparent. I don't know that governments will find it in their interest to be wholly transparent, just as individuals don't,
no,
right?
You're right.
I don't expect that. But what I think is worth observing is the degree to which the rhetoric matches the actions, because it's up to we, the people, to always hold those in power, wherever they may be, to account. And if they're not held to account, anything can happen.
Right.
I think if the U.S. government and you're making a long-term bet, right? The long-term bet clearly is in favor of freedom. It's in our interests.
Yes.
It's in the interest of people across the world. And there may be bumps in the road. There may be situations where hostile governments are manifest. But ultimately, in the long term, this is in everyone's interest.
Yeah, I would agree, and I hope that the U.S. government and others realize that as well. I think the more people have freedom and access to information, the better they can determine how they want to live their lives.
Yeah. One just quick thing I wanted to point out is this is from the Atlantic. Technologically, it says the suitcase project will rely on a version of mesh network technology which can connect devices like cell phones or computers, creating a web without a centralized hub. So essentially, I mean, even if, you know, what if this laptop gets, or suitcase gets into the hand of the wrong person? I mean, you know, they can't control, I guess, that technology once it's there on the ground, regardless of where it is, for your question about Iran and Syria.
Yeah, well, and I wonder if it gets in the hands of the wrong person. I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a problem, because all it'll be is somebody will be having more access to more information.
Yeah.
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 Well, this is a good way to get it started today, because the stuff we're talking about is really today how people are using the internet and the access to the information they have to make changes on the ground. We're going to go live to broadcast just now. Stay with us. It's going to be a great show. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in The Stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. We're bringing you, as always, stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, how a web community is fighting bribery in India, and how Twitter exposed a murder cover-up in Macedonia. As always, our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab-Eldin, is here looking out for your feedback. Also joining us on the couch today is Ben Rattray, the founder and CEO of Change.org, the world's fastest growing social action platform. Ben, tell us what a social action platform is.
Yes, we built a platform that allows anyone, anywhere around the world to start campaigns around issues they care about, very local in scope, and mobilize like-minded people. It's human rights, it's environment, it's any issue that people care about, from San Francisco to Saudi Arabia to sort of anywhere across the world. Millions of people taking action every single day.
That's really cool. Well, today we're starting out with stories of people taking action. And Ahmed has got some good stuff to share with us in just a little bit. But let's jump right into our main topics. Today we're talking about India and Macedonia. And remember, you can always have a say on our stories at our website, stream.aljazeera.com.
أنا اسمي حسام الحملاوي ناشط ومناهض للتعذيب في مصر and I'm in the stream.
Imagine having to pay a bribe to see your newborn baby in hospital or to get your driver's license. Corruption has been a rampant part of Indian society and was grudgingly accepted as the only way to get things done. But a web community has decided to fight the problem by creating the site IPaidAbribe.com, where people can anonymously share their experiences with bribery. If you take a quick look at my screen, This is a workflow that is taken from I Pay to Bribe. At the top it says, tell us your story. The idea is that you can submit stories of corruption that you encountered, what bribe you were asked to pay, and how much it was. IPAB analyzes it, collates it with a lot of other information. They've had over 10,000 submissions since they've been launched in over 300 cities across India, and we change processes. By that they mean they've actually had an impact on certain government agencies in reducing the amount of corruption and actually getting them to change the way they operate. And it says, finally, together we tackle corruption. This is a people-driven project to really make a difference. The site has even got videos in various languages that showcase some of how you can deal with being asked to pay a bribe. Let's take a look at this one directly from ipaytobribe.com.
Be confident, be firm, be assertive, and address the officers by their names without sounding too rude.
विधिगल वलिमुறை படித்துக் கொள்ளவும் एजेंटों से बचें अपना काम स्वयं करें.
Now joining us now via Skype from Bangalore is Swati Ramanathan, the co-founder of the I Pay to Bribe website. Also with us from Bangalore is Jessica Wallach, head of research at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. Jessica and Swati, thank you so much for joining us. Swati, I want to begin with you. What motivated you to start I Pay to Bribe?
Thank you, Derek. It's a pleasure to be on the show. We were motivated by actually doing something about corruption. I think that across India, if you ask any citizen what is the top ailment in the country, if it's not the number one, it's at least within the number three. The response will be corruption. But we all feel helpless in the face of corruption. So this website is to actually look at what is the market price. What is the size of corruption, retail corruption. We are not interested in looking at the hype of corruption, big scams, big scandals, what we're talking about as the wholesale corruption, because this is there in every country, US, everywhere that you look in the most developed countries as well as full democracies. So our goal was to look at those areas of corruption which impacts the citizen on a day-to-day basis and impacts their quality of life. So we wanted to give citizens a platform where, first of all, it's kind of a confessional and a cathartic confessional, and then to actually discover what is the going rate for corruption. So we took a semi-humorous look, but with a very serious intent of tackling this issue of retail corruption now, in India.
Let me ask you a question, because when you speak of retail corruption, I think that's really well put. It's the day-to-day corruption we find in our daily lives. I remember at one point in Ghana, where I'm from, I used to have to pay a bribe to get my mail at the post office. So it's the sort of day-to-day thing that I think is what you're addressing. Part of what I'm wondering, though, is many Indians will not have access to the internet. So how does your project account for that, or can you?
No, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the choices that we had to make. But we decided that we need not boil the ocean at one go. We wanted to begin in a way where it was pan-India, and which would allow a lot of at least the internet. And by the way, internet usage is spreading, especially in urban. And since our focus was on urban, not on rural, we felt that this was a good place to start. Going forward, we want to use the power of mobile technology and communication to link to this, and so that the best time to get people is when they're actually in the pain of paying that bribe. And mobile is really widespread in India, in urban India, so it would become a very useful way for people to report their bribes.
Jessica, I want to bring you in here. I understand that you are also interested in this issue, and you look at some of these human rights issues in India at large. I'm curious, how can a project like this have an impact when corruption is so endemic in the society?
Well, actually, so what my main work has been on is the power of citizen data when matched with government processes to affect public management. And I think a project like this is really path-breaking in a lot of ways, because what it's done is it's made essentially it's given a public venue for a secret act in a way that's very incentive compatible. People can report anonymously, so they're not on record as being the person who paid the bribe. It's also very well done in the sense that it asks for specific information to collate it in a way that aids public management. So it's collated by department, by process, and you can see in how it's changed public management that that information has been used by leaders to identify the processes most subject to corruption and to prod them to change them to be more automated and less prone to corruption.
Now, Ben,
I think that said...
Go ahead, Jessica.
No, I mean, I think one other piece of this is that one of the powers of something like this is it really taps into a long-felt passion and a long-felt energy into the society and unleashes a very powerful force.
Okay, that's a perfect. Thank you, Jessica. That's pretty much lays out what I wanted to bring to you, Ben, because you're talking about a social action network in change.org. How does something like this, where people have come together and said, we're going to create something independently to impact this problem, how does that start to shift the mindset in a society around an endemic problem?
Yeah, I think it's a really important part of empowerment. I will say one thing, Derek, about your question, but inaccessibility in certain areas, if you don't have access to the internet, what's powerful about this kind of platform is if you're able to have impact on the corruption overall, it impacts everybody equally around society. So even if you can't report it, a small sliver of the population exposing this is really powerful overall. And what we see is making social change personal and local. The most important thing for advancing change isn't big national movements to start. It's starting small, starting local, peer-to-peer, person-to-person, and that's where things get from the ground up.
Swati, I just wanted to ask you this because we're getting a lot of tweets in from HJ Jim Rao Kane saying, next we should take the bribery show to Nigeria because we'll be shocked. Whoever's been to Nigeria, you have to pay a bribe. We also have someone saying, Bazramit, saying in Egypt the question might be, has anyone not paid a bribe in the lifetime? So we know your platform has, in 350 cities almost in India, there have been reports of bribery since you started this. My question is, you spoke a little bit about mobile technology, and G. Parayal is asking, what are the next steps with this I paid a bribe? So why mobile? And if you could just speak a little bit about that.
Well, the mobile is only to include as many people as possible, and I think that's essentially the key, and also to get the reporting, the incentive to report, it becomes higher in our hypothesis when you are actually at the pain of that bribe giving. So I think it's just that, to just increase the pool of people who can report and to make it directly at the point of paying a bribe. So that's the reason.
I want to give a take on that point that you just raised, Ahmed, because that question of who has paid a bribe is a really good one. If you take a look at my screen, this is an image from Transparency International that talks about bribery around the world. And if you look, you can see these various colors represent, the darker the color, in this instance, the more bribery is done there. The more yellower colors are less bribery.
Right.
And if we just dive into India in particular, what we find is that India ranks pretty poorly on the scale, a 3.3. Now, this is a scale of 10, so the lower you are, the more corruption there is. Right. Well, let's go over to Egypt. We see Egypt is 3.1. Yeah. According to Transparency, even more corrupt than India. And let's go over to Nigeria. Nigeria is at a 2.4.
Right.
And this is something that, and you can look across these continents and you can see that this is happening around the world. And Jessica, I want to come back to you with this point. We understand that an Indian activist by the name of Anna Hazare really captured the imagination of many Indians with his hunger strike earlier in the year. He's actually got the Indian government to at least engage in some changes within 4 days of his initial hunger strike. But we also found that there's an Indian minister by the name of Kaushik, he's a chief economic advisor, Kaushik Basu, who's argued that a certain class of these retail bribes should be made legal, that the paying of the bribe should be legal, and as opposed to the receiving of it. The idea being that if you remove the legal problem for paying it, then people can actually declare when they were forced to pay a bribe. Considering that this is being tackled from so many different angles, do you think that a proposal like this is realistic and could help the situation?
Well, I think, first of all, what economists are really good at doing is taking a socially charged, deeply contextualized situation and making it into a generic analytical problem, and somehow missing a lot of the sort of social sentiment around that. And I think that's what happened with Koshik's paper, which I think actually in many ways is running parallel to I Paid a Bribe, because his point is that the incentive to take a bribe is based on the assumption that that action will remain secret, because both actors have an incentive to keep it secret. And what I think Swati and her co-founders have done is say, no, it will not be secret. And this is in the language to motivate the site. It will not be a secret, and therefore, if you know it's not going to be a secret, or you know it's only going to be a partial secret, you might be less likely to take a bribe.
Okay.
I think that, it has its power, but perhaps making it legal is going to miss the larger social point and backfire a bit.
One great comment that came in from MN Maghrebia saying we also shouldn't ignore that bribing and corruption, perhaps to a lesser extent, also occurs in the Western world as well. And up on that map, for example, if you roll over the U.S., it gives you what?
So the U.S. is at a 7.1. Right. Canada is at an 8.9. If you come over to Sweden, it's at a 9.2. I believe that Singapore is the least corrupt nation at a 9.5 or something of that nature. Swati, I want to pose one final question to you. What kind of response, has there been any negative backlash based upon what you're doing?
Actually, no. I think that if you look at it in a country like India, we have three kinds of people as far as corruption and bribery is concerned. We are either victims, we are perpetrators, or we are beneficiaries. We are looking at those that are victims of bribe taking. The beneficiaries are those that actually go beyond the entitlements. If I'm a victim, if I'm entitled to a certain service or a good from government and I have to pay a bribe, if I have to get my tax receipt, if I have to get my license, if I have to get my death certificate, these are all things that are due to me from government. And so I'm a victim. The beneficiaries are those that are in part of the big scams, which, people like in recent times, it has been sensational. But I think we need to bring some sanity back, because there is no such silver bullet to say, if we do this, by passing this bill, we actually wipe the slate clean of any kind of corruption in the country. So I think it requires a whole bunch of very serious, and I really liked what Ben talked about, which is to say that it has to be small, measurable initiatives. It can't be just beyond the romance of it. What do you actually do? How do you actually catalyze all of this angst that middle-class India clearly showed by coming out in thousands to support anti-corruption issues led by these people? So I think that we have not had any kind of backlash so far. We've actually had good news and we've got good results where we've had certain departments come back and say, transportation, for example, who said,
Swati, I'm going to interrupt you just there because we actually have got some clips on our website that talk about what you were able to accomplish with the Transportation Division, and I think it's very impressive. I want to thank you, Swati and Jessica, both of you, for joining us today on this topic.
Pleasure, Derek.
Now, you can hear from actual users of I Paid a Bribe on our website, stream.aljazeera.com, where you're also going to find many more stories with videos, images, and tweets. And as always, if you want to tell us your stories, tweet us at AJStream. We rely on you, our online community, to help keep us informed. In that vein, Ahmed, what kind of stuff have people been talking to us about?
Well, Derek, we've seen this story about the gay girl in Damascus develop. And now a new post on the blog itself, as you can see here, is a confession from a 40-year-old grad student. He's American, and he's actually been posing as this gay girl, this blogger in Damascus. So Ali Abu Na'ma, who's the founder of the Electronic Intifada blog, is going to be joining us in the post show because a lot of people have been tweeting at us wanting us to talk about this. So if you want to talk to us about that story, you can join us in the post show. So we'll be discussing it there. But we've also seen reports from Ruwaida Mustafa of the banning of the only Kurdish newspaper in Turkey. This happened yesterday, which was the election day on Sunday. So police attacks on Kurds celebrating election results, she's making that allegation. But what we do know is that this newspaper is called Azadiya Walat. It was shut down due to what Kurd comment on Twitter is calling repressive press laws in Turkey, claims that it's making propaganda for the illegal organization that is the PKK in Turkey. So this is the actual website we just wanted to share with you, Azadiya Walat. We're hearing that it's been shut down and that the paper's last two editors were sentenced last year to 138 years and 160 years in prison. What do you make of this?
I think if the Turkish government wanted to mobilize a bunch of Kurds around fighting the government, fighting oppression, and fighting for freedom of information, they couldn't have done anything better than shut down this paper, right? If you want to get an increase in demand for the paper, you shut it down. And I think it's an ironic approach in which shows the power of social media reacting.
Okay, so we also have a lot of feedback from Bahrain, which we'll get to in another show, hopefully. We're going to be following this story. But for those of you who want to be following us or talking to us online, you can also text message us at the number at the bottom of your screen, +1 920 786 8653. That's +1 920 786 8653.
My name is Jennifer Ehidiamen, and I'm a young journalist from Nigeria, and I'm a part of the stream.
People in the southern European nation of Macedonia are protesting the government's alleged cover-up of the killing of 22-year-old Martin Neskovsky on June 7th. He'd been taking part in political celebrations after the election victory of the ruling party. This is an image of him that I have on my screen, and we found there were many, many images of people actually engaging in protest in Macedonia about this particular topic. I want to show you a little bit of what's happening there on the ground. The protesters believe that a police officer from the infamous Tiger unit was responsible for this murder. The government initially claimed his body was found unharmed, and for days government-run media refused to cover the killing of Martin. Twitter users quickly began questioning the story and exposed the reality behind his death. This is a story that really looks at how social media can step into the breach, as we've seen many times when state-controlled media or is not actually telling the story as it stands on the ground. Now, joining us now from Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, is Dejan Velkoski, a blogger who's been following the protests. Welcome, Dejan, to the stream. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, it's good to be with you. I'm just sorry that I missed today's protest, and I'd just like to say kudos to all my Twitter friends that were there.
Yes, well, I want to ask you, what is at the root of this story? It seems that the clear issue is that the Twitter was used as a methodology for telling the truth of what was happening when the state media was not able to. Are people protesting now primarily because of the death of Martin, or are they protesting about the government cover-up?
I wouldn't say they were unable to. They were more like unwilling to report the truth as it developed. The protest started as a reaction to the boy's death, but after that it turned into a protest against police brutality, because if the murder was reported the morning after the act, probably the protest wouldn't have happened, knowing our mentality. But 38 hours after the fact, our Ministry of Interior did not acknowledge that there had been a murder that happened. They said that the boy was found, as you mentioned, was found unharmed without visible signs of injury, and that the doctor from the ambulance claimed this, which is a little bit hard to believe, because I don't know a doctor that would say that after hearing what the doctor who did the autopsy said. The boy had a broken nose and a almost completely crushed left side of the body. Yes. Therefore, many people saw this as an attempted cover-up, and therefore the young people said that they would not rest until the truth comes out and the demands of the protesters are met.
And that brings me to my next question, which is, we understand that there has been a history of police brutality in Macedonia. So what exactly is it about this story that has caused such outrage, and what are the protesters demanding?
Well, the Twitter community did compile a list of maybe over 20 cases of alleged police brutality in the last 5 years. The thing is, those cases were marginalized by the fact that they were either people who were connected with crime previously, or there weren't enough witnesses. But this time it happened in the biggest square in the country with hundreds of witnesses, and it was hard to keep it a secret. And there was a journalist present. She initially reported the story. When she asked in the ministry, they said we haven't had such case reported, so if you have any information, relay it to us and we will see what we can do. Because of that, after the facts came out, the protesters want a reform in the police, where the special units will be made more accountable for their actions, and on the other hand, there will be a governing civil body which will have active control in the police. That's one of the demands. The other one is resignation or dismissal of everybody that's in charge, including the minister Gordana Kuloska, who is refusing to take responsibility. And this is in part because in the 20 years that our country has been independent, only one minister, I checked this out, only one minister has given a resignation after the plane crashes in '93. After that, no resignation has been taken by the Prime Minister.
I want to get Ben's input on this because of your work at change.org. You know, it seems that people having access to free information is actually forcing governments to be more accountable. Do you think we may be entering an era where the relationship between citizen and government may be changing?
I think it's unavoidable and it's already happening. I think what will be most interesting in this case is not just the tragic case we're talking about now in Macedonia, but the reaction, the skepticism the population will have at any information the Ministry of Information or Interior sends, right? I think it's going to be a really pervasive impact, and the government can no longer expect whatever information it gives will be accepted at face value.
There you go. I want to grab a tweet from online. Ahmed, it seems that you're getting to a couple of interesting points.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting questions for you, but one that will just is a good comment we're going to read is Ratcan saying, Macedonia needs these protests to make politicians aware that we're here and we're not going to let them kill, bribe, or push us. And we've seen that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Dejan, I want to come to you for one last point. Has anyone heard a response from the family of this young man?
That's an interesting question because on one hand, there was a video on pro-government media where his father is urging for the protest to stop, but then the protest would join, and I have this on the footage and video of protest day 6, where his uncle and his brother came with the huge photo of Martin Nishkovsky
to the protest. So it seems that there could even be a potential divide within the family. Dan, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but we're coming to the close of the show. But we really appreciate you taking time to elucidate this story for us, and we'll continue talking about it more online. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, also for joining us. As always, we're going to be continuing in the post-show. You can join us at stream.aljazeera.com. We're going to be speaking specifically about the story of a gay girl in Damascus. Join us online. Tweet us at AJStream. Hi, and welcome back to the Post Show. We are going to be talking about a number of issues that we think are really important. One of them is the story of a gay girl in Damascus, a Syrian blogger who was allegedly kidnapped by authorities last week, and it turns out that the story was false, the blog was a hoax. But before we get to that, we're going to be covering a couple of other things. We have a guest joining us for that story, so definitely stay with us. Ahmed, before we get into the story out of Syria, talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Saudi Arabia.
In Saudi Arabia? What specifically?
Well, I understand that there have been these protests about the driving issue.
Oh, forgive me. I thought we were talking about Bahrain.
And so Saudi women drivers have been hoping. There was one woman who was arrested a couple of weeks ago for actually going out and driving. And apparently the basis of the story is that there isn't actually any rule, whether in Islam itself, nor in Saudi law itself, that says that women can't drive. And so it's become sort of a cultural norm there, but it seems that women in Saudi Arabia are rising up against that norm.
Right. Well, a lot of people don't know about this story is that there's some Saudi women who have to drive because there are actually, lower income neighborhoods, lower income people who actually don't have a driver and can't rely, or they don't have a family member, a male family member who can drive them. We saw an instance of this 2 weeks ago where a woman was arrested and then she was released. And just last week, 5 or 6 women were again arrested. So a lot of people are talking about the fact that the way we're going to see this Arab awakening embody itself in Saudi Arabia will be through this driving campaign.
That's really interesting. It seems like the idea of an Arab awakening it's penetrating around the world. It's not just an Arab awakening, it's like a people's awakening. And I don't want to be too Pollyannish about it because I think that it's very early. And we don't know how all of this is going to play out. And, you know, the struggle for freedom is a long one. But it looks like what's happening is Saudi Arabia, women in Saudi Arabia are finding their own unique way to advocate for more freedoms.
Absolutely. I think what's notable here is this is not a new problem. Right? In 1990, a number of Saudi women got together, all driving, and were arrested in a very similar situation, but it didn't blow up. It didn't explode. And what we see now, augmented by social media, is you have, you know, Manal Sharif, who's the woman who took a video of herself, actually was taking a video, put it on YouTube, was subsequently arrested, and now has helped incite, mobilize many, many additional women who started a campaign on Change.org, asking, in fact, other people around the world, Secretary of State Clinton, to stand in solidarity with the women and try to advocate the Saudi government's change of this overall policy.
Yeah, you know, I grew up in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, as well as in Doha and in a bunch of other countries all over the place. And one of the things I remember very clearly about Riyadh, I got there when I was a kid, and I remember being on the bus with my mother and my sister, and we were having to sit in a separate section in the back of the bus that was literally closed off with another door. I remember when we would be walking down the street, they have the religious police, the mutawas, that would be making sure you're in compliance with a modest code of dress, and that the mutawas would actually physically beat people who they felt were not in compliance. So I think that one of the things that's worth considering is what is the potential risk that these women are taking. I mean, it's not like you're talking about a society that is soft on infractions against the law. What are the potential risks that they're facing by standing up for these kinds of rights?
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely dangerous. I mean, the women are incredibly brave. I mean, this is a radical stand they're making. And Manal Sharif, who was arrested, had to sign a letter by the government committing never again to drive. They're absolutely putting themselves at risk. And one of the reasons why it's so important for social media and people across the world to be connected to this case is because to the extent that there's exposure, there are more people on Facebook and Twitter and Change.org aware about this issue, it's going to make it more and more difficult for the Saudi government to crack down. So the protests will be happening actually on Friday. I know you're going to talk about it more later in the week. Yeah, well, we're actually going to be on talking about this issue in depth on Thursday because of the protests on Friday. Can you just tell us, before we get to the next story, tell us a little bit about how Change.org is involved in this? Yeah, so we connected to a number of the women who are a part of this movement right now. They've started a small group on Change.org, Saudi Women for Driving. They started a campaign first asking for the release of Manal Sharif, which is successful. Subsequent to that, now they're lobbying Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to ask for this stand of solidarity, this very basic freedom of movement for the women, and they have a series of additional campaigns they'll be launching after Friday that are really building momentum piece by piece to build overall a narrative for freedom. You know, I'll say another thing that's interesting, Ahmed, about this particular case is I've been reading a lot about, you know, how Saudi dissidents are thinking about things, and apparently King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia gets credit from a lot of these people for having been something of a progressive, at least by Saudi standards. Do you think that maybe there's an environment being created there where perhaps there's a little bit more room for dissent within Saudi society? Yeah, I think many governments in the region, specifically in the Gulf, are seeing that they have to make certain concessions. So they're choosing, you know, wisely as to which ones to make and which ones. And, you know, because there's no law against it, because they're the sole country in the world that actually bans women from driving, it would make sense that this is one that perhaps he would be endorsing. Yeah. Well, I want to move on to another story that involves a woman who has been struggling for her rights, or at least that's what many people thought. It's a story of Amina Araf, I believe, Amina Abdullah, pardon me. Amina Abdullah, who was blogging under the banner of a gay girl in Damascus. And it turns out that she's not gay, she's not a girl, she's not in Damascus. She's a 40-year-old American. She doesn't exist. Who is, she's not a 40-year-old American man, married man, who is in based in, I think, Edinburgh, in Scotland. And we're very lucky to have joining us now Ali Abunimah from the Electronic Intifada. Ali, we understand that you did have an opportunity to speak directly with Mr. McMaster, who's been behind this hoax. What was the nature of your conversation?
Well, I didn't speak to him exactly, but what we did is that the Electronic Intifada was able to investigate and to reveal the identity of the man behind the hoax. We followed leads that were given to us by a number of people, some of whom have been named and acknowledged publicly, and some of whom have not. We were able to piece all the information together and to name the man behind the fraud. And I want to stress that it's a fraud because what I've seen throughout the course of the day is sort of a tendency in some of the media to make light of this and to minimize the damage and harm that this fraud, which has gone on for a number of years, has involved deceiving people, lying, manipulating people in real life by using false personas, infiltrating solidarity groups, stealing people's likenesses and identities and so on, that it has caused a great deal of harm. It's not something to be taken lightly and to sort of turn the perpetrator into a celebrity.
Well, so Ali, to that point, one of the things that we've been discussing here is how this potentially impacts genuine dissidents in Syria, particularly given the fact that the government of Syria, like the government of Tunisia before it, and Egypt and Yemen and a number of other places, have said that when there were protests happening, these were protests that were fueled by outsiders, fueled by Westerners, fueled by all kinds of different parties, as opposed to acknowledging the real indigenous grievances of their own people. Doesn't this serve the purposes of the Syrian government when it really is a Westerner that was making these stories up?
That may be. I'm not sure that that's the bigger problem. One of the things I've heard from real people that we are in touch with in Syria and other countries is that they do rely on the device of anonymous blogging or using pseudonyms in order to speak about issues that they don't feel comfortable or safe writing about under their real identities. And I think that that's a legitimate thing. And such people have the concern that this fraud has meant that they will have less credibility, and if, heaven forbid, they're in a situation where they're really in danger and need help, that nobody will hear their cries because of this despicable fraud that Tom McMaster and possibly others have pulled.
So, Ali, would you call this digital espionage? Because Tamimi 101 wrote us saying, McMaster is a classic example of digital espionage and activism to interfere with other countries' affairs, on the point Derek was making.
Well, what I can say is this. What got me concerned and interested, and what got us interested in trying to break this hoax, was when we saw that the fake personality of Amina and some of the other sock puppets, the fake personas that had been created, that they were infiltrating our communities, our activist communities. For example, I was surprised to discover that I was friends with Amina on Facebook and that we had many friends in common. I became concerned that this could be some kind of hostile intelligence gathering operation, because we live at a time when, for example, Israel has said that they're going to spend millions of dollars on social media, on using social media to spread their message or to disrupt.
So you were made to feel vulnerable.
Exactly. And so we investigated it because of that concern. We didn't find any evidence of any government involvement or any intelligence operation involvement. I can only talk about the evidence we've found, and I don't want to speculate about things that we weren't able to actually see.
Yeah, and on that, I think it turns out the whole thing seems to have been done a bit sloppily. I mean, he has allegedly said that he was trying to claim that she was abducted in order to end the story, but that's what sparked the story in the first place. I do believe that one thing we should be careful of is, as an organization that uses social media for sourcing, we want to be cautious about the kind of sources we get.
Right.
I still don't think that this diminishes the value of social media reports that we're getting out of Syria about the violence that's being perpetrated there.
Especially where it's important to note there are no journalists on the ground, or if there are, virtually none journalists.
Exactly.
So it does complicate matters.
Ali, we want to thank you for joining us, and thank you also for the journalism that you did in helping to reveal this hoax.
Thank you.
Ben, it's been great having you here. Hope that you'll come back. Ahmed, as always, it's awesome. We will be here. You can check us out again tomorrow, and you can tweet us in the meantime at AJStream. We will, as always, see you online.